Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to join. In the interest of finding a time that works for everyone globally, we found a time that works for absolutely no one. So we appreciate you joining us. Just a few introductions. I'm Paula Fontana. I lead marketing here at iluminr. I'm joined here by Alex Taylor and Mike Geyer. Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. And my name is Alex Taylor. I'm the Global Head of Emerging Technology at QBE Ventures, which is the venture investment arm of QBE Insurance. And as you might be able to tell from my job title, I have a long career in technology and for the last decade in insurance, focusing on the applications of technology like the ones we're talking about today to the insurance industry.
Great. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Geyer. I'm a director here at BDO USA. I work in our forensics technology group. I have about 20 years in working in technology, cloud computing. AI is a big topic on everyone's mind. So happy to be here to talk with you, Paula.
All right. Thank you, Mike. So for our agenda today, like I said, lots to go through here, but we plan on touching a bit about both Alex's and Mike's journey to AI innovation and dive into some of the work that they've been doing at their respective organizations, including some work that we've been doing here at iluminr. We're going to be discussing some key shifts that we're seeing in risk and insurance and some current applications of the technology, as well as do some future gazing. Where is this all going in the future, and looking at the balance of the risks that are involved with the introduction of AI, as well as some of the rewards, and how can we as practitioners and leaders really help guide our organizations through that process. So one thing, just in preparing for this, I think one thing that really struck me was sort of the mix of headlines, right? I think we've been using, whether you knew it or not, we've been using AI for quite some time, just in the daily applications that we use at work and at home. But I think what we've seen more recently is the settling into something much more mainstream. And so with that, Alex, just to kick us off here, one, just curious about sort of what sparked your interest and your journey into the realm of AI, particularly as it relates to insurance, and maybe some of the things that you're working on currently at QBE.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to dwell too much on the past, but I've sort of been an AI uber nerd for probably 35 years now. So when I
35
was
years ago.
even when I was quite young, I was sort of entranced by the possibilities of machines acting a little bit like human beings. And of course, back then that was pie in the sky type stuff. But if you look very specifically at the last decade or so, we've gone squarely from systems, AI systems that have been produced for one particular purpose. And this is, document classification, this is image recognition and that kind of thing. That sort of, got people's interest up, but it wasn't generally useful. The difference we've seen in the last 18 months to 2 years has been this sort of awakening, the democratization of AI, as I like to call it, where people realize they can talk to a machine, to a language model like ChatGPT, in the same way that they would talk to a human or an employee, and ask it to perform a task of relative complexity that is at least equivalent in performance to what a junior employee might be able to do. And it's that promise that's really started to look at the insurance applications. A lot of what we do are quite cumbersome, shall we say, document analysis tasks, and the promise of being able to do that even slightly more automatically is tremendous. And that's really where I've been digging in the last year or so, is looking at the implications of that on a lot of tasks that we do in this industry.
Wonderful. Yeah, and just echoing that, Mike, you and I have worked in the field over the last several years together, and I think have been part of your journey in AI innovation. What sparked some of that interest, that early interest in the potential of AI to really drive forward risk and resilience, and tell us a little bit more about what you're leading at BDO.
Yeah, so I think, with Alex, I also was enamored, very early on, who can kind of discount, Rosie from the Jetsons and things like that, kind of sparking the the love for kind of intelligent robots and cartoons in our childhood. I think we've really seen the rise of AI as just the absolute amazing tool to help with problem solving. And really, I think Alex really hit the democratization element here. We're putting just some of the most powerful tool sets in the hands of really anyone wants. So being able to push that intelligence out to the edge of these organizations and these different risk programs within an organization, and allowing people to make intelligent decisions at the edge of an organization is a really powerful prospect here. So that's something that's really been exciting for us here.
So before we dive into more discussion, I want to open this up to the group here. And no cheating on this one. This was a recent report that actually I would think was released just in the last week or so by Microsoft. And they did a study on what percentage of knowledge workers are currently using AI at work. And so we're going to ask all of you, no Googling, no cheating. Don't look this up if you don't already know it. But take your best guess at what percentage of knowledge workers use AI today. And Alex, I'm not going to ask you because you already know the answer.
I got $50 writing on the answer.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and show the answer here. It's 75%, which when I read that stat, that was much higher than I had anticipated, although I know the realities of working with other knowledge workers in the industry. And so it shouldn't have surprised me. Alex, Mike, what were your thoughts when you saw that stat?
I think it's interesting when you consider what we mean by use, of course, because a lot of the time, I think people are using a technology without necessarily being cognizant of that. I mean, it's so easy, I think, now to either directly use something, and that's the classic jumping into ChatGPT and reformatting an email, for example, or the AI that's built into, for example, the tool we're using right now. So Zoom uses AI to blur backgrounds, to clean voices. If we look at it that way, of course, you're moving close to 100%.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Alex. And additionally, I think what they wasn't clear on is that this was authorized or company supplied tool sets, whereas this sort of kind of people bringing their own AI tools to the job, which is again kind of introducing some additional risk into the landscape here. So I think that's something else to dig into. And then it brings up a good point of you really need to have a very strong AI policy within your organization.
Yes.
So that people are aware of the risks and really you're not putting yourselves up to these potential openings.
It's interesting that you consider that the general person now considers that AI tools are so generally useful that it's almost like they forget that they have obligations to protect data as well. It's a great sign for the future of the technology, but it's also, to Mike's point, a reminder of the obligations that people have to think about where their data is going.
Absolutely. Yeah, there have been numerous headlines, whether it was Samsung engineers feeding source code into ChatGPT or Amazon employees, feeding trade secrets into a chatbot. There's been no shortage of examples. And I think for a lot of organizations, it's resulted in them banning the technology. But I think one of my takeaways, in reading some of this research was people are using it, whether it's permitted or not. And actually this next, so bring your own AI is extremely prevalent. across the demographic groups, which so your employees are using it, Mike, to your point, your employees are using it whether it's permitted or not, because it is seen as an accelerator. It is seen as a means to get more efficient. And quite frankly, which we're going to talk about later, like this is, very much considered to be a skill of the future. And so, from an employee standpoint, having the opportunity to really apply those skills and put them into practice really very important. So, but fascinating research, I think it points to, what we've been talking about. This I'm not gonna play, but there's and I'll share it in the chat. There's a town hall. This is Reid Hoffman, who was one of the founders of LinkedIn, and obviously has been very involved in the investment community. And but ultimately, he goes on to say that in a 5-year period, and this was recorded about a year ago, which is basically an eternity in AI AI lifetime. But he goes on to say that every profession is going to have its own co-pilot, and I think that's really relevant to to all of us, but especially in the realm of risk and insurance. As you think about that, Mike, how do you see AI really transforming the realm of risk, resilience, insurance, compliance? How you decide to bucket it? What are you seeing?
The kind of the two big trends that I'm seeing that we're working with a lot of our customers on is really digging into the data that these companies have been amassing over the years. So I think we've been generating petabytes of data over the last few years, and we haven't been using it. We've been amassing huge amounts of data and really kind of refocusing on that data, using data as a risk asset, and starting to mine data. AI is a great tool to help you make sense of that, because it can really start to go in and look for patterns that we don't really see. So using AI tool sets to really kind of look for things that were hidden to us, and find that insight and be able to make actionable changes based on it. The other thing that we're also seeing that AI can help with is personalization. So we can use AI to really personalize education. When we do things like tabletop exercises, we can use AI generated scenarios, generate videos, make things really personalized to specific sites, departments, where things feel really personalized, but we can use AI to leverage that in a really cost-effective and time-effective. So bringing that personalization to the program.
Now, Alex, when you were speaking to that, that shift that's occurring in terms of our ability to take data and making apply it in different in different ways on the fly. You talked about this fundamental shift behind really leveraging unstructured data, which unlocks a lot of potential that we really hadn't seen today. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been involved in a lot of data projects in the insurance industry, and it's almost been comedic to Mike's point, the way that as an industry, we've aggregated information literally over generations in the hope that one day we might be able to use it. And this is, looking at a claim as an example, you'll store your claims documentation, the emails that go back and forth, the raw documentation. People were scanning printed documents and then just dropping them in an attachment to that claim. But then the only thing that you ever actually used was a short description in a column somewhere that was the structured data equivalent, or at least, an unstructured piece of data in a column. Or, every now and then somebody got the inspiration to go and look at, a generation of claims and extract keywords or classifications or whatever it happened to be. So you've got this sort of mountain of data that's been sitting there forever, but you're only using 0.2% of it, the stuff that happens to be in a table that you can actually do analytics over. And even then it was rife with errors. The promise is that the day has now arrived where all of this information that we've aggregated, to Mike's point, petabytes and petabytes of data that can give us insights into the nature of claims, new underwriting factors, new risk components, things that can help our customers as well as the industry to understand the true nature of what drives risk and claims and approaches to underwriting. We can now do this very, very quickly. We can extract the actual intent and underlying cause in documentation, and we can surface that in a different way at the drop of a hat. I mean, of course, the important thing to think about going forward will be the distinction between knowledge and intelligence. And I think that's the stage we're at now, where just because you can go and find a particular relevant piece of information, interpreting that is still largely the role of a human being, even though we are seeing the first few sparks of what we're starting to call multi-stage reasoning, looking at the information that a system can find in the haystack, and then going and applying that contextually to something that's relevant to the task at hand. And I think if we look at the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see a lot of focus on that second part. An AI system, LLMs are very good at finding information, at making a basic interpretation or classification, but doing something that amounts to structured reasoning over that's where we're going to see this uplift.
Yeah, and it gets to what Mike was talking about in terms of ultimately being able to better personalize information, sensing what information is relevant, and then surfacing that to the appropriate individual, along with recommendations on next best action, which is something that we've been after in the industry, risk and resilience, being smarter about our response strategies. I think another thing that you had touched on, just in conversation is this potential around a lot of things getting simpler, faster, cheaper to do, even from a customer experience perspective, which is absolutely something that's been well sought after in the insurance industry. How have you seen that come to life at QBE?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that the customer experience part is this constant ratcheting of increased capability. The thing that has always frustrated me in the way that our products are exposed to our customers is the complexity of them and the difficulty of underwriting risk. Essentially asking a question of a customer where we have an expectation that they understand the product innately, that they understand their own risks, which in many cases they don't. And in fact, the reason that we have such a great broking community is that the broker's role is often to do that interpretation, to talk to the customer about the nature of their risk, to actually turn that conversation into underwriting factors. The good news is that a lot of that is starting to get easier. In fact, a lot of brokers are starting to use underwriting co-pilots to interpret information from the customer and make that journey from first conversation to underwritten policy much, much faster. But it does increase the obligation on all industry participants to start using some of these tools. Otherwise, frankly, you might get left in the dust.
Mike, what have you seen in terms of how risk and resilience teams are leveraging the power of AI to really democratize some of these capabilities?
Yeah, I think I think we're just really starting to see people dabble. So I think what we're starting to see now is folks really get curious. So we're seeing people start to use them to generate scenarios, use them to help with after action reporting. So making, as Alex was saying, making sense of lots of data. After an incident might happen, to collect and summarize and make sense of things. We're just starting to see people, do that predictive type of behavior where we're looking at both past data sets and any sort of predictive, incoming data markers, and trying to predict what, any problem events that could be on the horizon. But I think we're just starting to crack the surface. So I think we're going to see a lot of evolution over the next 2 years.
We get a lot of questions around specific use cases of AI in the realm of risk and insurance. Alex, you had a great example in the context of climate risk, which tends to be pretty nebulous yet and difficult to define for, I think, a lot of organizations. Can you speak to how QBE is leveraging AI to better understand not only the trajectory of physical and sorts of events, but also where organizations stand with regard to their compliance to various policies around the world with regard to climate.
Absolutely. So, it's increasingly a question that we're being asked by our customers because of the perception of exposure to climate risk, and a lot of people are familiar with many of the climate related events that have been occurring in recent years, particularly in the eastern seaboard of the US, for example. Catastrophic weather risk is at the front of everyone's mind. Something that QBE's been trying to do for a number of years now is to essentially educate our customers as to where they're going in their emissions transition and emissions reduction tasks. And a lot of them publish these ESG reports, parts of which cover exactly where are my emissions coming from as an organization, how am I progressing in my goals of reducing those. And it's something that's very difficult to aggregate because everybody publishes their statistics in a different way. Some companies are better than others. To an insurer, where we have obligations that we've communicated to market, where we plan to reduce emissions in not just our primary, our scope 1 emissions, but also understanding the emissions of our customers across our insured portfolios. The first step of that is actually knowing where emissions are coming from, where that progress is coming from. And when you have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of customers, that's a really difficult task. We did some work where it took about a day for a human being to read through an ESG report. And these things can be 300 to 400 pages long for major companies. So it cost, around $1,000 per company to actually do this work. And if you multiply that by the hundreds of thousands of customers we've got, it's an insurmountable task. As many people will be familiar, one of the tasks that modern AI systems, that large language models are really good at, is something called retrieval augmented generation. It's quite a mouthful. It essentially means reading through a document with a set of questions and answering those in a clear and succinct manner based on the source information. And there's been a lot of companies that have formed around that specific capability. It's almost table stakes now in the large language model space. But rather than it taking a human a day and costing around $1,000, it now takes around 15 minutes and costs around 8 cents to process the information for one company. And that's really quite remarkable when you look at that, because it takes a task that would have taken years and years and billions of dollars to something that you could even redo every 6 months when your reports are produced. And what that means is that all of this information is turned into knowledge, to structured data that we can now perform analytics over. And it means we can go to one of our customers and say, well, you're in this industry in this particular space, and here's how you're compared to your competitors. Here's what you can do that others are doing. Here's how you're doing as a QBE customer. There's so much potential now because of the availability of information that can be consumed in a way that people want to, rather than being trapped in these documents. So obviously understanding climatic data, understanding emissions information is the first step into addressing some of these emissions challenges. I think we've now taken that first step, and that's super exciting.
And really, that story points to how this really enhances the discoverability of all sorts of data that has previously eluded teams, particularly where that the data is either difficult to access or unstructured, and it kind of gets to sort of this notion that, in Reed's conversation, he talks to sort of that concept of having, whether it's having the capability of really amassing these large quantities of data, really see across for patterns, and then a report out on, as we were talking about before, those material elements of information and carry those things forward. Another piece we were talking about is sort of what this means more from a regulatory compliance perspective. Whether that be in the arena of climate science, or whether that be in the arena of more generalized application, and particularly as we work toward building more resilient organizations, being able to see across, previously siloed functions of an organization, across siloed organizations altogether, taking a more holistic, ecosystem-centric sort of strategy, and understanding how these different elements really work in harmony to deliver these important products and services to the market. I think is a really very interesting application of some of these emerging technologies. Mike, I know you're doing a ton of work in the financial services sector, specifically around analyzing not only the regulatory aspects of this, but also surfacing, whether it be through advanced Monte Carlo analysis, or combining that in tandem with kind of identifying better scenarios to help teams put these concepts into practice in a more defined way. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we're working with our customers to really kind of moving towards a digital twin of their organization. So what we're really doing is kind of trying to approach as close to a 1-to-1 ratio of our digital representation of what actually exists in the real world. So what that allows us to do then is run different simulations, and thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of different permutations of what if scenarios. So let me pull the sweater thread, tweak this. What if I lose this server, or this building, or these 10 people are out sick today? We can do all sorts of different things and see what the impacts would be. And sometimes it's surprising. It's things that you wouldn't necessarily think. And we can often find the reasons why we might see real world behavior. So we had one customer who was having adverse effects in their outputs for their company. We couldn't figure out why. But using AI data, we found out was it came back to related to the predictor was absenteeism at the location, and how many different products they make at that location as a manufacturer. So there's different different ways of mining the data, finding out what the different levers are to kind of understand what you need to look at, and AI can help you refocus that lens. With financial services, where we can use that to map that to regulations that you would need to pay attention to by jurisdiction. And there's so many different transactions that will be happening. If you can map those back to all of the different policies that need to be accounted for, and look for anomalies that different statistical tests that you can factor into your AI model to look for irregularities. So kind of looking for fraud prevention and things like that. So that as these transactions are coming through, you can kind of keep that into all of your activities into compliance. So that's a big piece of what we work with our customers on, is making sure that we set up these compliance programs so that they take advantage of some of these emerging technologies.
Just curious, because I think a lot of these elements sort of point to, I guess, depending on how you're architecting your model, and whether you're building your own, or if you're leveraging something outside of your organization. there's an opportunity to really centralize some of these aspects that we've kept really very controlled within our organizations. Do you see AI as a centralizing force, or do you see it more as a means to decentralize and differentiate? Or maybe it's a little bit of both.
Maybe I'll start on that one. So, I think that almost ironically, we're seeing movement in both directions there. The capability itself of being able to consume this technology, both from the knowledge and the intelligence side, is clearly something that people want in their organizations, but the source is quite diverse. On one side, we're seeing open source models being brought into organizations, and Meta is at the forefront of this with Llama models. Whereas on the other side, we're seeing consumption of larger cloud-based models. OpenAI is at the forefront of this, of course. I think we need to distinguish the capability itself, the ability to be able to perform tasks that AI systems can perform in an organization, from the source of those. And I think in many cases, organizations are going to see both a split model being adopted, potentially smaller models being run in-house on potentially more sensitive data, and larger, more complex tasks being performed by models that are fundamentally, let's call it centralized, external, not sourced or created by an organization themselves. The important thing, though, is the frameworks that are on top of these. And there's a really fascinating trend that we're starting to see here, that's similar in a way to what we do with humans. We put humans through compliance training. We get humans to do certification and education to make sure that they comply with the obligations they have for the task that they perform in a regulated industry. We're starting to see a very similar thing take place with AI models. Effectively, bring models in, bring them in from a variety of sources, but ensure that they're ethically grounded, that they're free from bias, that they're put through a battery of tests to make sure they perform in an appropriate way, and also their performance is audited and recorded as metrics. As long as those things are in place, it's fundamentally no different to what we do with humans in a workplace today. And I think that as machines become more generally capable, dare I say it, as they become more human, we're going to see a further merging of the assessment frameworks between humans and machines.
And it's in some ways AI is the great equalizer, and even talking with different organizations, particularly those that might be representing minority groups, that they see this as so the advent of this concept of swarm intelligence, or being able to create the capability of an agent to act in your behalf or inform based on that set of learnings that you have as an entity or as a collection, but then interact with the broader. It's interesting to think about this in the context of insurance, or even the regulatory arena, because I think it does change the rules of engagement quite a bit. Whereas today there's sort of a known set of information or data that's readily available, whereas if you sort of open this up, we were talking before the session today about the potential to really force multiply the capabilities of Monte Carlo analysis. And if you have that at your disposal, what does that mean in terms of how insurers scrutinize your preparedness, or your readiness to respond, or the risks that they're taking, by taking you on as a customer, or even from a regulatory perspective, really peer into your capabilities. How do you see that evolve? And this is a little bit of future gazing. Obviously, we don't really know all the answers here, but are you seeing sort of a trajectory come together in terms of how these groups interact under the guise of having that more robust picture of how things come together?
I think that the important thing to recognize here is that regulators are on the same journey as everybody else. That fundamentally we're seeing the emergence of regulations both at the national body level, at the governmental level, in tandem with the capabilities of the systems themselves. And much like the rest of the world, I think that regulators continue to be surprised by the capabilities of these systems, but it's also important to recognize that, and this is something that a lot of people will be familiar with, the hallucinatory effect, for example, in language models, where systems can be very convincingly wrong. It's important to recognize that as much as an AI system might look like it can do everything today and it can do it with aplomb, that we're still on a journey here. The important thing is, and thankfully we've seen this in a lot of different regulatory environments globally, that regulators are up to the task. That there's a lot of different approaches that have been taken to ensuring that systems perform appropriately, the companies use technology appropriately. And in many cases, that's looking at minorities, at disadvantage, and making sure that the products that we offer, even if they can utilize more information faster, that it's done in an ultimately fair way. And one thing that I really like here is that companies are popping up now that tack on to AI models to ensure that these things are in place. So an example is Fair Play AI, really interesting organization that produces metrics that can be consumed by regulators as to the performance in bias and fairness of models being used in financial services. And it's the statistics that they speak to on their website speak for themselves. That I think that it's going to be essential as we move into the next 5 years or so, that this kind of thing becomes the baseline for how we use artificial intelligence in a workplace. And that applies almost equally to both people using AI and interpreting results based on things that AI makes a start on, or as we move towards AI being ultimately responsible for an end-to-end decision-making process. It's, as I said, an evolving space, but one that thankfully people are paying a lot of attention to.
We've got a couple of questions here we're going to get to in the chat, but before we move on into sort of balancing the risk reward equation, but I guess as an interesting segue to that, we talked a bit about some of these new capabilities falling into the wrong hands, and I think one of the things that we're seeing within the cybersecurity realm is not only AI as an asset on the organization's behalf to really sift through the noise and identify those signals that are most relevant. And then also what we've been working on at iluminr, and how you look at this from a preparedness standpoint, some of these emerging risks that we're seeing arise within organizations and within the broader context. How do you better prepare people for some of these novel risks that really have no blueprint for a response, right? But one of the things that we talked about in preparing for this is sort of how AI has really changed the landscape for response, not only from an organizational perspective, but also with regard to adversaries being able to exploit vulnerabilities. And Alex, you had a really interesting stat. This is a more dated stat, but I thought also drew similar point, where the time between when a known vulnerability is published and the time that that vulnerability is exploited has really decreased significantly in recent years. And you had a really astonishing stat that I think was pretty profound in terms of our ability to respond.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. And look, I've been a software developer for a very long time, 35 odd years now, since I first picked up a keyboard and started typing. So, one of the first things that I did when I looked at large language models was looked at their ability to write software, to write code. And it started out quite basically, but now if you look at some of the more recently announced models, I mean, even the updates to Gemini Pro and to GPT-4 that were announced yesterday, these systems are now seriously good at writing code based on a description. One of the fascinating things when we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective is that CVEs, the critical vulnerabilities that are announced in software through centralized bodies, are essentially very good descriptions of exactly how to exploit software. And it turns out that if you feed that into a large language model, it can do a very good job in most cases of actually producing code that exploits that particular bug. So I was on the phone with the founder of Anonymous and LulzSec, so two big hacking groups, one hacktivist and one for profit, who has turned into to a member of the good side now. He works with the FBI, who's been doing precisely that, experimenting with turning a CVE, critical vulnerability announcement, into proof of concept code to an exploit. And talking to some of the CISO teams around the world recently, they've started saying that, if you look at the time between the announcement of a vulnerability and the first time you see an exploit at the edge of a firewall, it's now down to as little as literally 30 seconds. And no human, of course, could write a piece of code in that amount of time. The fact that you can now go from these vulnerability announcements to an actual targeted attack in that amount of time means that the responsibility that we have to make sure that our software is not just appropriately patched, but also that we've got multiple layers of security in an organization, so that if we can't patch immediately, we've got our backups, we've got our firewalls that can detect unusual activity. It's so essential now. And if you look at a lot of the vendors of more recent pattern-based and AI-based defense systems for organizations, they're now starting to focus on having multiple lines of defense, knowing that exploits can appear very rapidly. How can we protect an organization? Because obviously, you can't update a piece of software in 30 seconds if that hasn't been announced previously to you. So yes, AI is a force for good. Unfortunately, in some cases, it can be used for evil as well. And it increases the obligations we have to make sure that we're appropriately defended if people choose to use it that way.
Yeah. I was going to say it can be used from the human perspective, the human entry point as well, right? With the deep fakes and things like this. So, a lot of those, exploits, the human exploits are becoming sufficiently indistinguishable from reality as well. So I think that's another huge thing to focus on with your security trainings and tabletop exercises is to really talk about verification and understanding what is real and what are official communication channels, and how are official things, how do official things get announced within an organization, when to double check things, if you get kind of asked to do something, and make sure that you're not making taking action when you shouldn't be, things like that. So making sure that you have those policies in place.
Yeah, it gets to the whole question of what is truth.
That's true.
Yeah, being able to distinguish reality is getting more and more challenging. And really, I mean, it kind of goes back to some of the conversation that we had around everyone's using AI. It's been really well democratized at this point. And so how do you enable and empower your people to be able to distinguish between truth and fiction, asking the right questions, having the right policies in place, the right controls. It was an interesting, I had read a book recently, The Coming Wave. It's a really very good book about AI. And they had posed the challenge of, imagine an attack where some of this continuous learning capability that we're threading throughout our organizations was put in the hands of an attacker, right? And so what if they had that same capability, which it's not too far fetched in terms of AI's ability to continuously learn based on your response, based on additional knowledge of the vulnerability as time evolves. And but it really does change the landscape in the service area for vulnerability when you have that sort of capability working against you. So I know we're already running short on time. I do want to do one more poll before we dive into the balance of risk and reward with AI, but want to ask this group, what does AI safety mean to you? I think it can mean a lot of different things to different people, and I think it's still being defined. But if you want to answer that while we delve into more of these other considerations, I actually saw this. I saw this meme this morning and I just had to pull this into the presentation, but I think it speaks to what a lot of us are seeing, hearing, feeling about AI, sort of waves of alarm, whether they're founded or not, and thinking through not only how that impacts us as individuals, but also our organizations. And so I guess as you think about the balance of AI risk versus reward, Mike, how do you advise organizations on ensuring that they have the right governance strategies in place?
So I think the first thing to do is really kind of understand what you're looking to get out of bringing in any sort of new technology. So really kind of having a clear picture of what the outcome that you're looking for. So just saying that you want to roll out AI, it's not going to be a winning strategy. So really kind of making sure that this is a business outcome-based decision. Then really start making sure that you have the capacity, so making sure that you have the skill set internally. This is a lot of new things, so making sure that you have people that are skilled up, either kind of take people through training, get them educated, and make time and invest in your people so that they can get skilled up. Or bring in consultants that can help with that, or both, so that they're able to take on the project successfully. Once you have kind of the people and the end goal, make sure that you're choosing the right technology for the job. Just because it's the most expensive, the biggest language model, doesn't mean it's the best for your application. For your your use. So kind of right sizing the technology for your purpose is really important. So those kind of those three pieces from a selection project setup perspective are really good. Then really during the project, focus on user-centered design, making sure that it's going to be adaptable and easy to use for your people. And then, once you're ready to go, make sure that you have a rollout plan so that, building the best car in the world, if you don't have a way for people to drive it or a road for them to drive it on, it's not going to do a lot of good. So making sure that you have a clear rollout plan and a way to keep the platform going for the foreseeable future, so that you have a sustainability plan for it as well.
I guess on that road analogy, I think one of the things, right, and going back to what you're talking about in terms of the Jetsons, try to find a point that I think one of the most profound things about AI is it totally changes the rules of the road, right? And so all this time, we have existing processes and means of which even the ways in which we interact with one another, right? And a lot of this is going to be thrown out the window and replaced with some other new paradigm. And I think that's part of the exciting element of this. And to your point, we have the opportunity to really design that and shape that in a way that is conducive to, being the society that we want to be, or being the organization that we want to be, or being the individuals that we want to be. So I think it's important to look at that not only as a challenge, but also an exciting opportunity for us to really recreate what the world of work looks like, or what society is like going forward.
To be sufficiently transformative, we're going to have to unlearn things. So that's a kind of an important piece here as well. we'll have to unlearn some bad habits, or some habits that we have today.
Yes.
But it's going to be an exciting transformation, and it probably is scary for all of us a little bit, because it's going to change all of our jobs, really.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a transition from a lot of tactical things, a lot of administrative things that we all do every day, and free up that time to be more strategic and analytical. So really the skills that are going to be in high demand are people that can use the insights that the AI can help bubble up, but really add in that additional layer on top of that, and really kind of bring the intelligence to to those insights that the AI can help.
Yeah, I just brought up this slide because I think it speaks to exactly what you're talking about here in terms of, the jobs aren't going away. If anything, there's more jobs, there's more work to do than we could possibly have enough people for. I think that's just the reality of it. And going back to Reid Hoffman's conversation, he likened it to when, it came out about self-driving cars and everyone was fearful of, oh, it's going to take away all the truck driver, roles, and it's going to materially change transportation. And I think it just hasn't moved as quickly as we had expected, but I think the reality is there's far more need than there is capability. And so and I think that's always going to be the case, irrespective of the trajectory of where AI goes. There is a question for Alex about, which I think dovetails to a lot of what we're talking about here in terms of balancing the risk reward equation here. As underwriters start using AI to analyze customer responses as it relates to their policy, what are companies like QBE doing to ensure their AI systems are ethical and unbiased?
Yeah, and it's probably the most important question in this space right now. And underlying that is, how are we protecting our customers from, to the point before, systems like language models being very confidently wrong about either the risk they represent or the interpretation of that. And I think that for someone like myself that's very optimistic about this technology, I'm quite pleased that QBE and organizations like QBE are taking a very conservative approach to the governance of these systems. And the default in QBE at the moment is, and if you look at our early systems in place where we're looking at underwriting information using AI, every time an underwriter logs into those, there's a big pop-up that says that I understand that as a human, I am the one responsible for the decision that a system is making, and they have to click a checkbox and they have to press OK, and that's recorded in a system. Alongside that, every response that comes back from a language model at the moment through a prompt engineering technique cites its sources for the information that's being presented to the underwriter. And that's again recorded at the system. It's presented back to the user. And that means the underwriter can look at the response. They can potentially get to that decision point faster. But on the right-hand side of the screen, they can click on those citations and it'll highlight to them what went into the AI system. So, a great example, and we've spoken about this publicly, is our cyber underwriting system. It used to take, 3 to 4 hours to review all of this information in a cyber insurance submission. It's tens to hundreds of pages of documentation. Yes, we can do that a lot more quickly now. Even if a human needs to review that information, which of course they do at the moment, they can at least have their attention drawn to the things that they need to pay attention to validate the decision that a machine's made to determine if they agree or not. And if you look at these systems that we've produced, the underwriter can click a thumbs up or a thumbs down button to say, whether they do agree or not, and then provide feedback if they do or don't. That, of course, produces this flywheel effect of improving the next iteration of the model, but it builds into the person the understanding that their job is essentially oversight. This is no different, in my mind, fundamentally to the way that a manager works in a team with an employee that's responsible for a job. Ultimately, the manager is responsible for their team's output, and frankly, it's no different here, whether your team happens to be people or AI or a combination of the two.
Yeah, it gets to that human in the loop and what Mike was talking about in terms of designing that interface in such a way that it feels intuitive. We're bringing, our teams along on the process. And I think, and for now, speaking to some of the conversation around hallucinations and just having the right checks and balances in place to guard against some of the challenges of AI, just being discerning about how you weave this into your organizational design. I know we're coming up really short on time, so we're going to do a quick lightning round around call to action, and then I'll open up for a couple questions. But what if you could name one thing that teams should be doing now to better prepare their organizations and their teams for AI? What would that be?
Mike, after you.
Oh yeah, I was going to say let people have time. Make room for people to experiment. Kind of do a AI boot camp where people can have make a safe space for them to experiment with some of the new tools. Your people are your best asset, so they're going to figure out the best way to leverage some of these new platforms for you. Kind of let the democratization begin and allow them to kind of maximize these platforms for your organization.
I love that. Let the democratization begin. That sounds like a marketing slogan. Alex, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think my thinking's very similar. I caution against reactionaryism, where people get afraid of this technology and start to ban it in the workplace. I mean, of course, having appropriate governance and controls is important, but to Mike's point, exposing your teams to what this technology can do, but also what it can't do is important. Because how can people be a judge of when to appropriately use a technology unless they're familiar with that and they're guided in the right way to understand limitations? Yes, absolutely let people experiment. Yes, be cautious around data. Yes, make sure that people have appropriate training on when to use confidential data and when not to. And that applies equally in AI as it does anywhere else. You don't print out confidential workplace material and leave it on a park bench any more than you give it to ChatGPT. And making sure that people understand the implications and that they're essentially the same thing is essential to maturely using this technology. But once you've got that groundwork in place, people can stretch their wings. They can start to experiment and understand how to use this in context.
Yeah, absolutely. I was at a conference recently where the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services talked about the law hasn't changed fundamentally, right? Whether you're using AI to discriminate or if you're discriminating on an individual basis, it's still illegal, right? Like it's not. So I think just using common sense around, some of the parameters of what we should and shouldn't be doing with the technology, wise words. I did bring this up on the screen if you are interested in bringing an AI microsimulation home to your team to story live out some of the scenarios that we talked about today. Go ahead and scan the QR code. That'll take you to a registration page, and we'll be in touch on how to do that for your team. And we do have one more question just to close out the session about do you think AI will benefit risk or resilience the most?
Mike?
Do I think it will benefit risk or resilience the most?
Yeah, one or the other.
Oh.
What's your bet?
I don't know. Probably risk in the short term. Just with the amount of data that has already been amassed, I think the tool set for the data mining and the pattern analysis, I think we can get some really big wins out of what we already have.
Alex, what would you say?
I mean, it's hard to differentiate, right? Because they both depend on each other, so understanding risk, which of course is a data challenge, particularly unstructured data, as we've discussed today, leads towards an understanding of how you can be more resilient. If anything, it'll help apply more risk information to a broader landscape understanding of the nature of resilience, not just within your own organization, but within organizations like yours. So I think, again, we're going to see one of these flywheel effects, but understanding the information in the raw, getting to the point where we can understand the nature of risk is really where this technology starts. So, I would say that, it starts with risk, but it ends with resilience.
Starts with risk, ends with resilience. These are great. You guys should join the marketing team. All right. This has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, Alex, Mike, for joining us. It's been fantastic.